Hi, today Zoey and Sassafras are still looking for ways to help their friend, the monster. In Chapter 8, The Preservative Hunt. Preservatives, where are you, preservatives? I muttered as I walked around the kitchen. I decided to start by looking on our counters. I saw some cooking oil we'd had forever and checked the ingredient list. The only ingredient listed was cooking oil. Maybe that was a preservative. I set it aside to check with my mom. Next, I picked up a can of beans we'd had for at least a year. Beans, water, and salt. Another vote for salt as a great preservative. A jar of pickles from our garden caught my eye. We'd made them ourselves at the end of last summer, so those were pretty old too. Oh, and Mom had said that pickling the cucumbers would preserve them. I closed my eyes and tried to remember what we added. Tiny cucumbers. They were so cute. Then we poured something over them. My nose wrinkled from the memory of the smell. It was vinegar. I really don't like the smell of vinegar, which is funny because I actually use it a lot. I love playing with baking soda and vinegar. I never get tired of watching them foam and bubble when they mix. I used to make horrible faces while I played until my mom invented an awesome trick. She added a few drops of peppermint extract to each cup of vinegar she gives me. When I make my pretend volcanoes erupt, it smells like candy canes are floating through the air. Sassafras interrupted my thoughts with a meow and pawed at the fridge. Great idea! I'll check the fridge next. I grabbed the vinegar and set it next to the oil. I opened the fridge and poked around. Milk, eggs, butter, all had only one ingredient, like the cooking oil. But unlike the oil, we kept them in the fridge, so maybe they didn't prevent mold on their own. I was pretty sure the cold from the fridge was keeping them from spoiling. Then my hand landed on some raspberry jelly. That was interesting. I'd been working on eating this giant jar of jelly for weeks now, and it was still good. It was in the fridge, but we also kept fresh raspberries in the fridge, and black mold spots still started growing on them after a few days, which meant there just might be something special in the jelly to keep it from molding. I took it out and read the ingredients. Raspberries, water, sugar. Sugar? Maybe. I set the jelly on the counter next to my other guesses. I looked through the pantry next, but all the crackers and cereals I found only listed strange-sounding ingredients at the end. Those were probably the chemicals made in factories my mom had talked about. I couldn't even read some of the names. They sounded like another language. I smiled down at Sassafras, who had decided to sit on my right foot. Any other ideas? Sassafras seemed to think for a minute and then left the kitchen. I followed. He ended up hopping into my mom's lap and purring. I guess that meant he was all out of ideas too. Mom looked up and smiled. Do you have some guesses for me? I nodded. We found a bunch of stuff that uses salt. That's a popular preservative. Our next guesses are oil, vinegar, and maybe sugar. Mom grinned. Great work. Those are all preservatives. I think they'd all be great to test. Are you ready to finish setting up your experiment? Just remember to change only one thing. And I know. And keep everything else the same. I will, Mom. Chapter 9, The Moldy Fur Experiment. I grabbed my bags of monster fur and my science notebook and went into the kitchen. I started writing down all the bits of my experiment so I wouldn't forget what I'd done. It would probably take a day or two before I could even tell if the mold wasn't growing on some of my test fur. I could definitely forget a lot in 2 days. Now I needed to make my guess. Which preservatives did I think would work? So she has a question. What will stop the mold from growing on Gorp's fur? Most of the stuff in the kitchen used salt. It seemed to work for an awful lot of things, so it would probably work on monster fur too. Hypothesis. That's her guess. Remember we talked about hypothesis? Hypothesis? Hypothesis. This is what she thinks now. She wrote it down so she wouldn't forget. I think salt will stop the mold from growing on Gorp's fur. All right, now to decide how much of each preservative to add. I needed to add the same amount each time. Let's see, maybe 2 teaspoons would be enough. That seemed good to me. So now this is her procedure. What she's going to do, what she's going to carry out. That's her testing, her experiment. Number 1, put the same amount of Gorp's fur in each Ziploc bag. Number 2, don't add anything to one bag. That's this one, nothing, just the fur. Don't add anything to one bag. Add 2 teaspoons of oil to another bag. Add 2 teaspoons of vinegar to another, and 2 teaspoons of salt to another, and 2 teaspoons of salt to another. 3, seal the bags. 4, put the bags in the same place in the barn and check every day to see if mold grows. Phew, that was a lot of writing. I shook out my hand. First, I sealed the bag with nothing but fur in it. I labeled it so I could remember that it was the one where I didn't add anything. The nothing bag should grow mold like normal. In a few days, I could hold it next to the other bags to see if they were doing a better job of stopping the mold. I got a new bag and added 2 teaspoons of vinegar and swished it around until all of the monster fur in the bag was wet. I crinkled up my nose. Blech. I quickly sealed the bag so I wouldn't have to smell it anymore. I labeled it vinegar. I did the same thing for the oil bag. Things were going just fine until I added sugar to the 4th bag. This isn't working, Sassafras. The sugar keeps falling to the bottom of the bag. Most of it isn't even touching the fur. Maybe it would be fine. No, it was definitely bugging me that it wasn't coating the fur like the vinegar and oil had. Woomph! Suddenly, a big ball of fluffy fur was next to me on the kitchen counter. I was about to yell, "Sassafras, off the counter!" when I realized he was bumping his head against the jelly jar. That was weird. Sassafras liked to eat bugs, not jelly. I popped him down off the counter. Maybe he was trying to tell me to put the jelly back in the fridge. I picked up the jar and glanced over the ingredients one last time. Oh, water. I turned around and picked up the can of beans. It had water too, right? The beans used salt mixed in water, and the jelly used sugar mixed in water. Of course. I added 2 teaspoons of water and 2 teaspoons of salt to a little bowl, and 2 teaspoons of water and 2 teaspoons of sugar to another little bowl. I stirred them both really well. Then I added 2 teaspoons of the salt water to the salt bag and 2 teaspoons of sugar water to the sugar bag. This time when I swished the ingredients around, the sugar and the salt water coated the monster fur instead of falling to the bottom of the bag. In my science journal, I wrote down the change I'd made to the sugar and salt bags. I clapped my hands together. Perfect. I was ready to move everything to the barn. Just then, my dad walked into the kitchen. I froze. Mom had told me that Dad couldn't see anything magical. Would these bags look empty to him? He'd probably think this was the weirdest experiment ever. Dad walked over and ruffled my hair. "Experimenting again, Zoey? What's this one about?" He glanced over my journal notes. Monster fur, that's a cute idea. Are you running a pretend experiment? He lifted up a bag to the light. It might make it more fun if you had some actual fur in there. Maybe Sassafras could donate some. Sassafras growled. I laughed. The bags did look empty to my dad. That's a great idea, Dad. Thanks, I chirped. After my dad left, I leaned down and whispered to Sassafras, Don't worry, you can keep your fur. Then I gathered up all my supplies and headed out to the barn. As I laid everything on the barn desk, I thought of poor Gorp's tears. If the things I was trying didn't stop the mold from growing on his fur, there wouldn't be enough time to run another experiment before the monster ball. And if Gorp was still moldy, he'd stay home from the dance again. My heart dropped. He had to go. This experiment had to work. The end of chapter 9. See you next time for chapter 10.